I decided to try out NixOS and I used it every day for the past couple of weeks to delve deeper into the Linux degeneracy. The main reason I moved from Arch to NixOS is that the video and editing apps were breaking too often for my liking, and the declarative and immutable style of Nix seemed pretty promising to me. Okay, I admit, it was mainly because of my distro hopping tendencies, but from what I heard it seemed like a good decision. So I got an USB, burned NixOS on it, and booted right into it. I went through the installer, which compared to Arch is a GUI one, so pretty cool. And what the hell, first time this happened to me. I just click on erase disk, but the installer failed for some weird reason. And yeah, I tried again, and this time it didn't work again. What? I just had a black screen and I couldn't do anything. Okay, let's try another one. Third time's the charm, right? And this time I chose the no mode set, whatever that means. And this time it actually installed and I was welcomed by the GNOME desktop environment. Have no idea why the installer didn't work the first time. I used like GUI installers in the past for Ubuntu and other stuff. I don't remember it, to be honest. But yeah, it was pretty random that it failed 2 times like that. Perfect. Now we can start to learn Nix. First things first, there is no pacman or app, which means that most of my installer scripts and configs won't work out of the box. I have to make some changes to them, but you'll see in a bit. And I guess there is a package manager, but come on, if you use Nix, probably you want to use the configuration.nix file, right? And after a bit of struggling, I managed to get i3 up and running because I don't really like using desktop environments like GNOME, even though it looks pretty cool on Nix. I still prefer to use my own i3, like really basic configuration, just to have a terminal, the browser, a file explorer, and that's pretty much everything I need. And now it's time to set up Neovim because, come on, the current theme looks pretty bad. And yeah, I need the Neovim setup. I need the Groovebox theme, and currently, I'm using Gruber, but yeah, I need the good colors. And I was surprised by how easy it was to get the basics over. The only issue is that I could not use Mason to manage my LSPs because Mason actually like downloads executables and runs them, so that doesn't really work on NixOS. To be honest, I didn't think about that when I moved over. And yeah, you just have to add each LSP into the configuration.nix and set up them manually, which isn't that difficult, but it's a bit different than how I was used to work with Neovim. Like, you just open Mason, install the LSP, and usually it's like if it works, and if it doesn't, then hope that tomorrow it will work. It's honestly, that's how the LSPs in Neovim worked most of the time. And I'm really curious to see if with NixOS I'll have that issue anymore, because like, yeah, it was a lazy way of doing it with Mason. Like, if you are lazy, you use Mason basically. You can have the same setup as I do now, also on Arch if you really want to, but come on, it's like easier to use Mason and not to worry about it. But yeah, like right now I just had to move my LSPs out from the Neovim setup, install them in configuration.nix, and then enable them manually, which is like one line of code, so it's not that hard. But now comes the real stuff. I started to hear a lot about Home Manager and flakes. Well, turns out I got myself into a rabbit hole and actually had to learn the Nix language for this stuff. And I spent the first day banging my head against the wall trying to migrate like Neovim to flakes, which, oh my god, it was so painful. And starting with this stuff, it was really easy. You just do nix flake init and you create a new flake project. That's pretty easy, I thought. It's like, okay, it's like npm init. Yeah, sure. And my next question was, okay, what's next? Like, what do I have to do and where are the docs? And this is one thing I learned about Nix, is that there are no docs. It would be too easy if there were documentation, but yeah, I mean, I guess there are a couple of documentation stuff, but maybe I'm too spoiled coming from Arch, where the documentation is, I mean, insert the Homelander perfect to every minute detail, if you know what I mean. But yeah, so I mean, I started to look into other people's configs, and I hoped that that would be, you know, the way to do it. But man, it seemed like it was impossible. It's so bad. And my main issue at this point was that I didn't even know how to run the flake. Like that was even worse. I sure the language is not that bad. Like the Nix language, it wasn't that difficult to figure out what some things meant. Although I didn't know for sure what how it works, but I had no idea how to run it. Like that was the main issue. And looking at other people's configs didn't help either with that, because there were no readmes. Like that's even like holy shit, no readme. But yeah, I mean, I cannot complain because I don't have a readme in my repo. Maybe I should add one. But yeah, I had no idea how to run it. Like even if I wrote anything that works, I didn't know how to run it. And yeah, I mean, I started to look for tutorials, and you know, the best tutorials from Vim Joyer, those were the best ones. And I also found a really nice one on GitHub. It was like how to make a really simple home manager setup, and that literally saved my butt. So like the repo really went in a lot of depth how to install the home manager, even though I already knew how to do that, because uh, that's the first step into home manager, so I had that one solved. But then, you know, like learning the basic stuff, like how the Nix language works. It's like the entire script is like a function. That's what I understood. And you have the inputs, you have also like outputs, and you know, it's something like the outputs will have access to the inputs. Obviously, it makes sense. And yeah, like splitting everything into modules, that's also really useful because you write less code. But yeah, the this tutorial really helped me understand the language much better. Like, why do you have all those things in the beginning, like packages and Nix packages and all of that stuff? That's pretty neat. So yeah, and after spending like 30 minutes reading through that repo, it's like 6 files, I actually understood what I had to do to make my stuff work. So I decided to make a really minimal Neovim config with NixVim for the first day, and then continue with my actual config the upcoming days. And you know, I wanted to do that just to prove that I am able to do it, because it's not worth to start writing the entire config if you don't know if it's gonna work. So I just wanted to have just the Groovebox color scheme set up, and that was everything that I wanted to do in the first day. And if I was able to do that, then perfect. Then yeah, it means that I understood how it works, and I'll be able to add other plugins as well. Next up, I spent a couple hours writing my Neovim config in Nix, and I know it's a waste of time, but it is what it is. And I don't know if it's just me, but brainless copy pasting stuff, it's quite enjoyable. And also my Neovim config is quite minimal, so it's not that big of a deal. And I also just, you know, transform this thing into the, you know, opportunity to learn Nix, basically, because my Neovim config is really simple, and it's like I have only one unknown in this equation. Let's say it's the Nix language, which I don't know. So yeah, I mean, I started with the global options, and here I have really few options, to be honest, really few settings, because I mostly care about relative line numbers. That's one thing. My vertical column at line 80, or I guess column 80, and you know, stuff like tabs, and pretty much that's all when it comes to my global options in Vim. And after that I wanted to get the keybinds because it's really annoying to not have your keybinds set. But yeah, most of my keybinds are just really simple, like easier copy pasting, opening menus. It's, I don't have that many weird keybinds. And some of the auto commands, um, like my most useful one is when I yank some text, it highlights it. So that's really useful because I know that I copied something, and yeah, by default you don't see anything when you copy text in Neovim, so that's pretty useful. And now it's time to actually get my plugins into the mix. And the most important ones, like the most important plugins for me, I don't know if everyone agrees with this, are Telescope, 3-seater, and some LSP with completion. And I guess not even the LSP, mostly completion is like CMP is more interesting to me. Being able to, have completion, quite useful. Sometimes I also use Harpoon and Trouble, but I need to get into the habit of using them more because they are really useful, and yeah, I don't use them enough, to be fair. And some other neat ones are Surround, which by its name lets you add like quotation around words, parentheses, switch parentheses with brackets and stuff like that. Really, really fun plugin to use. Undo tree, which lets you undo stuff in a more convenient way. You actually see the entire tree of changes, not just the list. And yeah, to do comments, just to have nicer to do comments, and Fugitive to have nicer integration with Git. And yeah, I was surprised by how easy it was to port all of these to Nix when I was using NixVim, because all of them were already, implemented into Nix. I just had to import them from NixVim, and that was all. And sure, there are a lot of ways to achieve the same thing. You can just use plain Neovim and write it yourself, but come on. I just wanted to have everything as simple as possible, and NixVim was the way, basically. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't really get everything ported. There was also some plugins that I made, which I couldn't get right away into the new Vim, so I had to do stuff myself there, which I was surprised by the fact that it wasn't that hard. Like, you just have to set, the GitHub repo and some stuff like that, so it's not that impossible to do. And yeah, another one that's not in the NixVim repo was the color scheme, the Gruber color scheme. And yeah, I mean, color schemes, I was lucky that this one was actually in the Nix packages, so I just installed it like that, and it worked, surprisingly. But yeah, I mean, all in all, playing a bit with my new Neovim setup, it looks like everything that's really important works, so I'm happy with it. And I'm really curious to see if the LSPs will be broken ever again from now on, because even though it happened rarely, it still happened on Ubuntu and Arch, and I was like, okay, the LSP doesn't work today, it is what it is, what can we do, right? So that's how it usually was the situation with LSPs. But yeah, I mean, I used it a bit, and looks like everything works. So the next thing, which is configuring i3, Tmux, Kitty, and all my other tools to use Home Manager. And I can say it was pretty difficult at first because of the documentation, obviously, or I mean, should I say the lack of documentation. And yeah, I mean, again, like coming from Arch, I'm used to having so much documentation that I didn't even know it was possible to not have documentation. So that's how it is. And yeah, I mean, I never appreciated how well written that documentation was until now. And actually, what I figured out that the best way to do anything in NixOS is to look at the source code and try to figure out from there how things work. So I went into the Home Manager GitHub repo, and I looked at each program or service that I wanted to set up, for example at i3, and from there I just looked at what options are available. I already knew what options I can set from my own i3 config, and I tried to map like from my config to how we write it in NixOS, and I just moved everything like that. It started to be a bit simpler if you do it like this. So yeah, basically that's how my workflow started to be. I look at the NixOS at home manager repo, I look at my own config, and I try to map how options relate to each other from the home manager like implementation and my own configuration. And some things that were still painful to do even like that were fonts, icons, and GTK themes. And the thing is, I don't really care that much about them. Like, I don't really care what font or icon or GTK theme I use. Sure, I prefer it to be dark theme, it's much better. But I mean, I still was able to make them work in the end somehow. Hopefully, it's not any like nothing is broken or anything. But yeah, again, I don't really care that my file explorer looks weird. It's like I rarely use it, mainly when I edit stuff, and it's easier like that to use a file explorer. But all in all, looking at the source code and trying to build a configuration like that, it's much easier. And of course, I was also curious if games run well on NixOS, because on Arch it was pretty easy to run games, especially with Steam and Proton, pretty easy. And yeah, I mean, setting up Steam is extremely easy. You just add it in the configuration.nix file. Obviously, I mean, who would not expect that, right? And not to forget, setting up the Nvidia drivers was I mean, way too easy. I don't know why it was that easy compared to Arch. Like in Arch, I had to write an entire script that was, I don't even remember, to be honest. It was like updating stuff. It was really weird. But here it was just saying something like enable graphics and then driver equals Nvidia. It was like, what? That easy? Maybe I did something wrong or something, but I mean, I can see the GPU in NVTop and all of tools, so it seems like it's working fine. So yeah, I mean, I guess on this side, like NixOS does a really good job on that. It's pretty easy to install drivers for even for closed source stuff like Nvidia. So yeah, really nice. So I guess it is really worth having a single configuration file that does everything for you. Like sure, I split mine into multiple smaller ones, like modules, but that was just to organize my stuff into like logical things like Neovim, i3, Kitty, and so on. And yeah, trust me, I've seen more complex ones too, like insanely complex, but I don't really see the point of that because I only have NixOS running on one computer, and yeah, I mean, I won't run it on anything else because I don't have anything else. Yeah, maybe like running only the Nix package manager on something like WSL, sure, why not? But I mean, yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter on the configuration, because if it works, it works. It is what it is. And with how NixOS seems to work, I think that phrase fits really well. Like, if it works, it works. And I don't think it's gonna break anytime soon. So yeah, I mean, in the end, my setup looks exactly the same, feels the same, works the same. So I think this is a W. Sure, when I have to install something, I need to edit a package.json file. I mean, it's configuration.nix, but you can think of it like a package.json file. But I think that that is an overhead that I am willing to pay if all my tools are safe from breaking. And the only downside of NixOS so far is the documentation. I mean, I know I complain too much about it, but yeah, it is what it is. And I didn't spend that much time with NixOS to notice any other downsides, but I mean, that's the biggest one. Like, I noticed that in the first like couple of minutes after installing NixOS, but yeah. And again, like, just for your information, it's much easier to look at the source code and figure out that way what you need instead of searching for documentation. Just look at the source code, it's much easier. And yeah, I mean, the language is also pretty intuitive, so it's not that hard to get the hang of it. It's really similar, I would say, to, I mean, it looks a bit like a Toml combined with Lua or something weird like that, or I guess JSON combined with Lua. But yeah, it's like a functional language, and you don't really need to understand it that much to get working with it. Like, you don't need to build fancy stuff. Literally, you can use it like a JSON file. It's that's the way I used it. I mean, sure, I have a couple of functions, but all in all, it's JSON with functions. Pretty nice if you think about it. Overall, I haven't used NixOS enough to be able to say if it's better than, or I guess better or worse than other distros that I used in the past, like for example Arch. So far I have a couple of things that clearly are better, like drivers and having programs that do not break. But the downside is it's much easier to install new apps on Arch. You just run a command. Here you have to go into the file, save it, run the upgrade, and yeah, but as I said, it's an overhead I'm willing to pay. And the other thing I think seems cool about Nix is that I feel like I have more control over my dot files, and basically I have everything in one big file, even though I split it's like one big repo. And yeah, it feels like I have more control over my dot files because I can see what font I'm using, like what tools, what versions, and all of that stuff. So it gives me more control over it. And yeah, also I always thought about this idea of having a package.json file for your programs. And I'm like, oh shit, there's actually a distro that does that. And yeah, I mean, it's really nice to have all your programs written in a file, so okay, I have installed this and all of that. And if in the future you get to a point where, okay, something broke, or I need to install something because some other tool doesn't work, then you can just see in the commit history, okay, so I installed this tool to make everything work, right? So, or I guess this application was used for something. And I mean, it's pretty cool to combine it with Git, and it's like having a distro based around Git, right? So that sounds really cool, right? The rollback feature. Even though I haven't used it yet, I still think it's pretty neat because you can literally just look at the commit history and see what applications you added, how you changed the config, and yeah, I mean, even go back to a previous config if you are nostalgic about it, I guess. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, it really feels like a combination of, it's like an OS based around Git, and that's really nice because if you know like Git, you cannot really break it. Like, you can go back to a stable version. So yeah, I mean, that's my experience so far with NixOS. I really like it so far because mainly because I was able to translate all my configs into Nix. If I wasn't able to get my configs, I mean, I would be like, oh, NixOS is trash. Holy shit, I cannot use Vim. But yeah, I mean, I guess I was a bit lucky because my Neovim setup was really easy to port to NixOS. So yeah, that's a W. So yeah, I mean, that's I guess everything for today, and hopefully we'll see how I can do something more with NixOS, learn more about it, and maybe in a couple of months I can have a stronger opinion on how it feels to use NixOS. But yeah, I mean, so far, the the title of the video is like I tried NixOS, so you don't have to. But yeah, if you want to try out NixOS, sure, go ahead. I think installing it is much easier than Arch, even though I had those issues in the beginning. I don't know why, but yeah, maybe it's gonna be a bit confusing at first on how to install things. That's the only thing I can think about, especially if someone is really used to Ubuntu. Let's say it's gonna be really confusing to them. But yeah, I in a way I really like a lot more this approach of having to declare specific, like really explicitly something that you want to do, instead of just running a command and then you completely forget what you did. I mean, the bash history is nice for that, but sometimes I feel like some commands like disappear from the bash history. I have no idea why. It's really weird, but happens to me way too often. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really cool to force yourself to explicitly state everything that you do on your machine. It's like much more, much safer in a way. So yeah, I mean, you have much more control over it. So yeah, I mean, that's everything for today, and I'll see you guys in the next one.